The hunt begins. Jack Carter woke up to the feeling of cold, slimy tendrils wrapped around his body. His head throbbed, his vision blurry as he tried to make sense of his surroundings. The air was thick, damp, and carried a strange metallic scent. He was hanging, suspended in midair, trapped in a web of living vines that pulsed like veins. His heart pounded in his chest as he struggled, but the bindings only tightened around him. "Where am I?" he muttered, his voice hoarse. A deep, guttural sound echoed through the massive chamber. It wasn't just any room. This was a throne room, and before him, seated on a dark, organic throne, was the most terrifying creature he had ever seen. The Queen of the Xalzora. She was massive, at least 8 feet tall, with an exoskeleton that shimmered like black steel under the dim green glow of the bioluminescent walls. Her elongated head bore a crown of jagged spikes, her 4 glowing crimson eyes fixed on him. Sharp mandibles clicked together as she observed him like a predator studying its prey. Jack had seen many alien species in his time as a space explorer, but nothing like this. She radiated power, control, and something far worse: hunger. He was not a guest. He was food. Jack swallowed hard. He needed to think fast. The Queen rose from her throne, her clawed feet tapping against the bone-like floor. Her long, whip-like tail slithered behind her as she approached him, slow and deliberate. "The human wakes," she spoke, her voice a mix of growl and silk, layered with something unnatural. Jack stiffened. She could speak his language. He had expected a painful, brutal death, being torn apart by monstrous jaws or devoured alive without a second thought. But now, she was talking to him. That meant he had a chance. I'd rather not be breakfast," Jack said, forcing a smirk. His voice was steady, but his body was trembling. The Queen tilted her head, intrigued. "You joke, even in the face of death." Jack exhaled sharply. "Call it a human thing." She stepped closer, her armored fingers tracing the air near his face, but never quite touching. Her claws were sharp enough to slice through metal. He had no doubt she could rip him apart in seconds. "You are different from the others," she mused. "Most creatures beg. Some scream. But you amuse me." Jack forced himself to hold her gaze. "Well, I'm glad I could entertain you. But maybe we can skip the part where you eat me." The Queen's mandibles twitched, almost as if she were smiling. "You assume you have a choice." Jack's stomach twisted. He had to keep her talking, keep her interested. If she was curious about him, he could use that. "Eating me would be a mistake," he said quickly. She let out a soft hiss, a sound that could have been laughter or irritation. "Oh, and why is that?" Jack took a breath. Time to bluff. "Because humans are different." He tried to sound confident. "We're not just flesh and bone. We're dangerous, more dangerous than you realize." The Queen chuckled, a deep, rumbling sound. "Dangerous? You are weak. Your bones snap easily. Your kind bleeds so fast." She leaned in, her glowing eyes piercing through him. "Tell me, human, how exactly are you dangerous?" Jack gritted his teeth. She wasn't buying it. Think. "We don't just fight with strength," he said, his voice steady now. "We fight with our minds. Our will. We survive. No matter what." The Queen studied him in silence. For the first time, she hesitated. Jack saw it. A flicker of doubt. She stepped back, her gaze still locked onto him. The room was silent except for the faint pulsing of the organic walls around them. Then, without warning, she turned to a group of alien guards standing at the edges of the chamber. "Take him to the arena," she commanded. Jack's stomach dropped. The arena? That didn't sound good. The Queen's eyes gleamed with amusement. "If you wish to prove your worth, then survive." The tendrils around Jack loosened, and he crashed to the hard floor. Before he could move, 2 massive guards grabbed him, dragging him toward a towering door covered in strange carvings. Jack's breath came in short, sharp gasps. This wasn't what he planned. But one thing was clear. He wasn't going to be eaten. Not yet. And maybe, just maybe, he had gotten into the Queen's head. The Queen's curiosity. Jack Carter had expected to be torn apart the moment he woke up in the dark, pulsating chamber of the Allure hive. He had expected sharp claws, tearing mandibles, and the raw agony of being consumed alive. Instead, he was still breathing. And the Queen, a towering, monstrous alien ruler, was staring at him with something he hadn't expected: curiosity. The cold, organic floor beneath him pulsed like a living thing, and the faint glow of bioluminescent veins running along the walls cast eerie shadows. The air was thick with an odd scent, metallic, damp, alien. Jack sat up, his wrists still bound in the strange, vine-like tendrils that had held him captive earlier. He flexed his fingers, testing the restraints. Not too tight. If he had a chance to escape, it wasn't now. The Queen stood before him, her massive form shifting as she observed him. Her exoskeleton gleamed under the greenish light, her elongated face unreadable. 4 crimson eyes bore into him, unblinking, as if she was studying an insect beneath her clawed hand. She had every right to see him that way. To her, he was prey. And yet, she hadn't killed him. Jack exhaled slowly. "So, you're not gonna eat me yet, huh?" The Queen let out a low guttural sound, half amusement, half something else. "Not yet," she said. Her voice was a layered thing, vibrating through the air as if it belonged to something far more ancient than her physical form. "You interest me, human." Jack tried not to let his relief show. He had managed to get inside her head, just a little. Enough to make her hesitate, but hesitation wasn't enough to keep him alive. "Glad I could keep things entertaining," he muttered. "But I still don't get it. You've got an empire to run, a species to rule, and you're spending your time talking to me. Why?" The Queen tilted her head, mandibles twitching. "Because I have never encountered something like you before." Jack let out a breathy laugh. "I find that hard to believe. You must have seen a lot of species before. What makes me so different?" "You are weak," she said simply. "And yet, you are not afraid." Jack blinked. "Oh, trust me, I'm scared as hell." She stepped closer, her armored feet making no sound against the bone-like structure of the hive. The temperature seemed to drop as she loomed over him. "No," she said, her voice quieter now. "I can smell fear. I can taste it. Your heart races, but it does not race with terror. It races with something else." Jack clenched his jaw. She was reading him like an open book. She wasn't wrong. He was scared, but more than that, he was curious, just like her. Curious about why he was still alive. Curious about why this brutal, merciless Queen hadn't just torn him apart. And deep down, there was another truth Jack wasn't willing to admit. Not yet. Some part of him wanted to know more about her. "Maybe I'm just a bad liar," he said with a forced smirk. The Queen didn't react immediately. Instead, she crouched down, bringing her face closer to his. Her exoskeleton was smoother up close, with fine ridges running along the edges of her jawline. Her breath was warm, carrying a faint scent of something Jack couldn't place, like burning metal and something oddly sweet. "You claim humans are different," she said. "Prove it." Jack tensed. That didn't sound good. "Prove? How?" he asked carefully. A cruel smile spread across her mandibles. "You will fight," she said simply. Jack's stomach dropped. "Fight? Who?" She rose to her full height again, glancing toward a large, pulsating doorway at the far end of the chamber. The organic walls around it writhed as if something massive was waiting on the other side. "If you survive," she said, "perhaps you are worth more than just flesh." Jack swallowed hard. "And if I don't?" The Queen let out a soft, chittering laugh. "Then you will feed something far less patient than I am." The tendrils binding him suddenly loosened, and before he could react, 2 towering Allure guards seized him by the arms, dragging him toward the ominous door. Jack struggled, but their grip was like steel. "Wait, hold on." The doors peeled open with a wet, sickening sound, revealing a massive, cavernous pit beyond them. The air inside was hot, thick with the scent of sweat, blood, and something rotten. The arena. Jack barely had time to take in the sight before the guards shoved him inside. He hit the ground hard, coughing as dust and debris scattered into the air. The pit was massive, hundreds of feet wide, enclosed by jagged alien stone. Strange, greenish light glowed from cracks in the walls, illuminating something that made his blood run cold. The bones. Piles and piles of bones, not all of them human. A deep, rumbling growl echoed through the pit. Jack forced himself to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs as he turned slowly. From the shadows, something huge moved. Red eyes opened in the darkness. A shape slithered forward. A massive reptilian beast, covered in dark, jagged scales. Its multiple limbs clicked against the stone, and when it opened its mouth, rows of needle-like teeth glistened with fresh blood. Jack exhaled sharply. "Well," he muttered, "that's not good." Above him, the queen watched from her throne, her glowing eyes locked onto him. "You claimed humans are different," she called out, her voice carrying across the arena. "Show me." Jack clenched his fists, eyes darting around the pit. No weapons, no armor, nothing but his wits. The beast let out a deafening roar and charged. Jack ran. The arena of beasts. Jack Carter had faced death before. He had been stranded on lifeless moons, shot at by space pirates, and nearly suffocated in the void of space. But this was different. The moment the beast lunged, Jack dived to the side, narrowly avoiding a mouthful of razor-sharp teeth. The ground trembled as the creature's massive claws tore into the stone where he had just stood. Dust and debris exploded into the air, stinging his eyes. From above, the queen of the Salzora watched in silence, her 4 crimson eyes fixed on him like a predator savoring its prey. This wasn't a fight. It was a test. And if Jack failed, he would be nothing more than a pile of bones in this cursed pit. The beast awakens. Jack barely had time to recover before the creature moved again. It was enormous, at least 15 feet long, its thick, muscular body covered in chitinous black scales that glowed faintly with eerie green veins. Multiple clawed limbs scraped against the stone floor, creating an unnerving clicking sound. Its head was elongated, almost reptilian, but with 3 pairs of eyes that burned with hunger. Saliva dripped from its open jaws, hissing as it touched the ground. Jack backed away slowly, heart hammering. No weapons, no armor, nothing but his instincts. "All right, Carter," he muttered under his breath. "Think. Fast." The arena's secrets. His eyes darted around the arena. It was a massive, circular pit, enclosed by towering rock walls covered in twisted alien carvings. The ground was uneven, littered with the remains of past victims, shattered bones, broken weapons, and deep claw marks etched into the stone. A few jagged pillars stood at odd angles, remnants of something ancient. More importantly, some of them looked unstable. Jack's mind raced. If he couldn't beat this thing with strength, he had to outsmart it. The beast let out a guttural snarl and charged again. Jack sprinted toward the nearest pillar, moving just as the creature lunged. At the last second, he dropped low, sliding across the dusty ground, feeling the wind of the monster's massive body soaring overhead. It slammed into the pillar at full force. A deep, thunderous crack echoed through the arena as the stone shuddered under the impact. Dust rained down, and the beast staggered back, momentarily dazed. Jack didn't hesitate. He scrambled to his feet and ran toward the next pillar, his breath ragged. 1 wasn't enough, but 2. That might just do it. The queen watches. Above, the queen leaned forward, watching Jack with an unreadable expression. Her generals and warriors stood in silence, observing the human struggle. Some of them had already dismissed him as doomed. But the queen was interested. This human was not like the others. He did not scream. He did not beg. He did not break. Instead, he moved like a predator, calculating, adapting, thinking. Interesting. The final strike. The beast recovered fast. Too fast. Its 6 crimson eyes locked onto Jack, fury burning in them now. Jack ran toward the second pillar, every muscle in his body screaming. The beast lunged again, but this time, he was ready. Just before impact, Jack leaped into the air, grabbing onto a jagged edge of the broken stone. The beast couldn't stop its momentum. It crashed into the second pillar with a violent, deafening crack. This time, the stone didn't hold. A massive chunk of the ceiling collapsed. The rockfall came down hard and fast, crushing the beast beneath tons of rubble. For a long moment, silence filled the arena. Dust swirled in the air, obscuring everything. Jack coughed, pushing himself up from where he had landed, his body aching from the fall. His ears were ringing, his lungs burning. Then, the dust began to clear. The beast was motionless, buried beneath the collapsed stone. Jack exhaled shakily. Holy shit. He won. The queen's judgment. Slow, deliberate applause echoed through the arena. Jack turned, his muscles tensing as he saw the queen descending from her throne. Her long, whip-like tail dragged behind her as she stepped down the organic, bone-like steps. The other Azal-Zora warriors watched in silent awe as their ruler approached the human. Jack clenched his jaw, wiping the sweat and dirt from his face. He was breathing heavily, body aching, but he forced himself to stand tall as she neared. The queen stopped a few feet away, her glowing eyes scanning him. "You surprise me, human," she said finally. Jack forced a smirk. "Yeah, I get that a lot." Her mandibles twitched in what might have been amusement. "You are not like the others who came before you," she mused, circling him slowly. "They died screaming. You, however, you think. You adapt." Jack didn't move as she came closer, close enough that he could feel the heat radiating from her massive form. "So tell me," she murmured, "what do you truly want, human?" Jack hesitated, his mind racing. Escape? Survival? Maybe. But now, there was something more. A chance to turn this into something else entirely. He looked up, meeting her glowing crimson eyes without fear. "Depends," he said. "What do you want from me?" The queen let out a low, satisfied hum. "Let's find out." The queen's temptation. Jack Carter had survived. He should have been dead, crushed beneath the jaws of that monstrous arena beast, or impaled on the jagged bones of the warriors before him. But he wasn't. He was still breathing, standing in the pit of a Azal-Zora deathmatch. And the queen. She was watching him differently now. Jack saw it in her eyes. The shift, the curiosity that had turned into something deeper. Not just amusement. Not just intrigue. Something dangerous. The Azal-Zora warriors, towering insectoid creatures clad in living armor, stood in silence as their queen circled Jack like a predator sizing up an unfamiliar rival. Jack's pulse pounded, but he forced himself to stand tall. He had won the fight. He had proven himself. Now he needed to figure out what that meant. The queen's invitation. Without a word, the queen turned and motioned for him to follow. The guards hesitated, no doubt confused by their ruler's sudden interest in a human, but none dared to challenge her. Jack exhaled and wiped the sweat and dust from his face. His body ached, but he kept his movements steady as he followed the queen up the organic, bone-like steps, leading out of the arena. He wasn't being dragged anymore. He wasn't a prisoner. Not exactly. The path led through a towering corridor, its walls shifting and pulsing with the same eerie, greenish bioluminescence that ran through the entire hive. Strange symbols, carvings of ancient Azal-Zora warriors locked in battle, covered the walls like murals of conquest. Jack wasn't sure whether he was being led to an execution or something worse. He kept his voice casual. "So, is this the part where you eat me, or are we past that?" The Queen didn't look back. "You still think like prey." Jack frowned. "Yeah. And what do you think I am?" The Queen stopped. Slowly, she turned to face him, her crimson eyes burning with something unreadable. "You are something I have not yet decided," she murmured. That sent a chill down Jack's spine. She took another step closer. Even though Jack had faced monsters, killers, and death itself, nothing compared to standing this close to her. She was terrifying. And yet, his instincts were screaming at him, but not just to run. Something else was happening here. Her voice was softer now, almost thoughtful. "You fought with no weapons. You thought like a predator. That is rare among your kind." Jack tilted his head, his mind working fast. "You've fought humans before." "Many," she admitted. Jack frowned. "And they all died." "All but one." Jack's breath caught. "Wait. There's another." She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she turned and continued walking, leading him deeper into the hive. Jack clenched his fists but followed. He needed to play this right. The forbidden bond. They entered what Jack could only describe as a royal chamber, a massive space with tall alien pillars carved from something dark and shimmering. The walls twisted with strange, living veins that pulsed softly, feeding into the enormous organic throne at the center. Jack was starting to realize that everything here was alive. The hive wasn't just a city, it was a being in itself. The Queen ascended the steps to her throne and turned to face him once more. "You claim humans are more than flesh," she said. "More than food." Jack exhaled. "That's right." Her eyes narrowed. "Then prove it." Jack clenched his jaw. "I already did. I survived." "You survived a beast," she countered. "Now you must survive me." Jack went still. The tension in the room thickened. "What exactly does that mean?" he asked cautiously. The Queen descended the steps again, slower this time, more deliberate. "I could break you," she murmured. Jack's heartbeat quickened. "I don't doubt that." Her mandibles twitched slightly, amusement. But there was something else in her stance now. A shift. A test. She was toying with him, challenging him. Jack had spent years navigating dangerous situations, negotiating with pirates, outwitting bounty hunters, bluffing his way through unwinnable fights. This was different, because she wasn't just testing his strength. She was testing his mind. Jack took a slow breath and met her gaze. "You're curious about me." Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate nod. "You are unlike the others," she admitted. "And that disturbs me." Jack let out a breathy laugh. "I'll take that as a compliment." The Queen studied him for a long moment, then motioned toward a side corridor leading away from the throne room. "Come," she commanded. Jack hesitated for half a second. He could feel the weight of the Jal Zora warriors watching him, their tension palpable. They didn't understand why their queen was letting a human walk freely. Jack didn't understand it either. But he had come this far. And he wasn't about to stop now. He followed. A deadly truth. The corridor led into a vast, hidden chamber, unlike anything Jack had seen before. Here, the walls were lined with strange, organic pods, suspended in thick, glowing tendrils, each holding something inside. Jack's stomach twisted as he realized what they were. Prisoners. Not just aliens. Humans. Some were in suspended animation, their bodies encased in strange organic cocoons. Others looked lifeless, their bodies shriveled, drained. Jack's breath caught. "What the hell is this?" The Queen's voice was calm. "What remains of those who failed to prove their worth?" Jack turned to her, his hands clenching into fists. "And the one who survived." She stepped forward, raising a clawed hand to a single isolated pod at the far end of the chamber. Jack followed her gaze. Inside, encased in an eerie greenish glow, was a man, a human, still alive, still breathing. Jack's pulse pounded. Who the hell was he? And more importantly, why was he still here? The Queen turned to Jack, her voice a soft whisper. "Now you understand," she murmured. Jack swallowed hard. Understand what? She stepped closer, her gaze locking onto his. "You are not the first human to intrigue me," she said, "but perhaps you will be the first to survive." Jack's blood ran cold. What the hell had he just stepped into? The betrayal. Jack Carter stared at the suspended pod, his heart pounding against his ribs like a war drum. The man inside was human, alive, but barely. His face was pale, his body thin, suspended in a strange greenish fluid. Tendrils wrapped around his limbs, pulsing with an eerie glow. Jack turned to the Queen of the Xalzora, his fists clenched. "Who is he?" His voice was sharper than he intended, but he didn't care. The Queen watched him carefully, her 4 crimson eyes unreadable. The last human to survive the arena. Jack felt something cold crawl up his spine. He had assumed he was the first, the only one. He was wrong. "You kept him alive," Jack said slowly, stepping closer to the pod. "Why?" The Queen's mandibles twitched. "To study him. To understand what makes humans different." Jack exhaled sharply. "And what did you learn?" Her gaze lingered on the pod. "That some of you break." Jack's stomach twisted. "And others?" The Queen's eyes met his. "Others are not so easy to break." Jack swallowed hard. He had no idea how long the other human had been here, trapped in this nightmare. How many had come before him? How many had failed? More importantly, was he next? The Queen's warning. Jack turned back to the pod, his hands pressing against the smooth glass-like surface. The man inside barely moved. His breathing was shallow, his eyes closed. "Can he hear me?" Jack asked. "No," the Queen said simply. "His mind is not fully awake. He lingers between life and death." Jack's jaw tightened. "Let him out." Silence. Then, a slow, deliberate step toward him. "You make demands," the Queen said, voice low, edged with amusement. "Yet you are still standing in my hive, surrounded by my warriors. Do you truly believe you hold power here?" Jack turned to her, forcing himself to hold her gaze. "If you wanted me dead, I'd already be a pile of bones in that arena." The Queen tilted her head, considering him. "You are bold," she mused, "but boldness does not equal strength." Jack took a slow breath. He had pushed her far enough. For now, he needed to play this carefully. "So what happens next?" he asked. The Queen's mandibles twitched again, and for the first time, Jack saw something uncertain in her expression. "You do not yet understand the storm you have walked into, human," she murmured. Jack frowned. "Then explain it to me." The Queen hesitated, just for a moment. Then she turned away. "Come," she commanded. Jack hesitated, glancing once more at the pod before reluctantly following. But as he walked, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was very, very wrong. A hidden threat. The deeper they walked into the hive, the quieter it became. The once busy corridors of the Xalzora fortress seemed emptier. Jack felt it first. The shift in energy, the tension in the air. The Queen must have felt it too, because she stopped abruptly, her claws flexing. Something was off. She turned slightly, her voice calm but firm. "Do not stray from my side, human." Jack had no intention of doing so. They rounded a corner, stepping into what looked like a council chamber. The walls were lined with massive stone-like thrones, each carved with the sigils of high-ranking Xalzora warlords. The room was dark, the bioluminescent glow dim. Jack's gut told him this wasn't a meeting. It was an ambush. From the shadows, figures emerged. Tall, armored, and not friendly. Xalzora warriors, but different. Their armor was sharper, more jagged, their mandibles twitching in something that wasn't just hunger, it was rebellion. Jack tensed, glancing at the queen. She stood still, her tail coiled, her claws half raised. And then, from the largest throne, a new figure rose. A Xalzora male. Massive, nearly as tall as the queen herself. His exoskeleton was darker, his eyes burning with contempt. Jack didn't need an introduction. This was someone important. The queen's grip tightened at her sides. Zelvok. Jack took a step back. So they knew each other. Zelvok tilted his head. You bring a human into our sacred halls, my queen. His voice was deep, rumbling, filled with undisguised hatred. Have you forgotten what we are? Jack felt the air shift. This wasn't just tension. This was betrayal. The coup begins. The queen's posture remained strong, but Jack could see the shift in her stance. You overstep, Zelvok, she said coldly. Stand down. The warlord let out a low, chittering laugh. Stand down. My queen, it is you who has lost your way. His gaze flicked to Jack. First, you spare the human. Now you bring him into our halls as if he is your equal. Jack could feel the heat of dozens of unseen eyes watching him. Zelvok took a slow step forward. You have gone soft. Jack saw it happen in an instant. The warriors moved, fast. Jack barely had time to react before the first soldier lunged. The queen blocked the strike with inhuman speed, claws flashing, tearing into her attacker's throat. The warrior collapsed, hissing in pain, but more were coming. Jack ducked as a blade-like limb swung toward him, barely missing his head. He rolled, grabbing a fallen spear from the ground. He wasn't a trained Xalzora fighter, but he wasn't defenseless either. The queen fought like a demon, her movements precise and merciless. Each slash of her claws sent a warrior collapsing in a spray of dark blood. But they kept coming. Jack knew what this was. A coup. A power struggle. They weren't just here to kill him. They were here to kill their own queen. Jack's choice. Jack turned, his mind racing. He could make a run for it, try to escape in the chaos. No one would blame him. But then his eyes locked onto the queen. She wasn't just fighting for herself. She was fighting for him. Jack made his choice in an instant. He grabbed the nearest warrior, slamming the spear into his side. The warrior screeched, stumbling back. The queen glanced at him, just for a second. Jack gave her a sharp grin. What? You thought I'd just stand here and watch? She let out a low, growling sound. Approval. For the first time, they were fighting together. The coup was in motion. The queen was outnumbered. But Jack wasn't about to let her fall. And for the first time in Xalzora history, a human had chosen the side of their queen. The war for the throne. The chamber was a maelstrom of violence. The coup had begun. Xalzora warriors clashed in a deadly blur of chitin and steel, their bodies twisting and colliding in a frenzy of rage, loyalty, and betrayal. The air was thick with the scent of burning exoskeletons, the wet hiss of alien blood splattering against the bone-forged walls. Jack Carter had no business being in the middle of this. And yet here he was. The queen of the Xalzora stood at his side, her razor-sharp claws drenched in the dark ichor of her betrayers. Her 4 crimson eyes glowed with fury, her body moving with inhuman grace as she carved through her enemies like a blade through flesh. Jack wasn't a warrior like her. He didn't have claws. He didn't have bioarmor fused to his body. But he had one thing no Xalzora had, a human mind built for survival. And right now, he needed every ounce of it. The fight for survival. Jack ducked under the swinging limb of a Xalzora soldier, barely avoiding a blow that would have shattered his ribs. He twisted, grabbed the fallen alien spear, and drove it forward with every bit of strength he had. The warrior screeched as the spear sank deep, but it wasn't enough to kill them. Not yet. The queen smashed through 3 warriors at once, her tail lashing out like a whip of death. Kitten cracked. Blood sprayed. She turned to Jack, just for a second. "You are slower than I expected, human." Jack let out a ragged breath. "And you talk more than I expected for someone in the middle of a damn war." The queen's mandibles twitched. Was that amusement? Before she could respond, another wave of warriors rushed them. Zelvok, the towering warlord leading the coup, watched from above, his mandibles clicking in satisfaction. "You cannot win, my queen," he called out, voice mocking, victorious. "Even now, the hive grows restless. Your rule is crumbling. The warriors turn against you." The queen didn't even spare him a glance. Instead, she turned to Jack and said something that froze him in place. "We must escape." Jack blinked. Wait, what? He had expected her to fight to the bitter end, to stand her ground and tear through anyone in her way. But she knew something he didn't. "Selvok did not act alone," she said. "If the others rise against me, I will not have a throne left to fight for." Jack's mind raced. The coup wasn't just happening here. It was happening everywhere. The queen was losing power. And if they didn't leave now, she wouldn't just lose her throne. She would lose her life. Escape through the hive. Jack barely had time to react before the queen grabbed him. Her powerful claws wrapped around his arm, and the next thing he knew, he was moving. Fast. She leaped from the battlefield with inhuman speed, landing on the far side of the chamber near a hidden passage. The warriors behind them roared in fury. "They flee like cowards." Selvok spat. The queen didn't stop. She dragged Jack through the passage, her powerful legs carrying them through twisting tunnels, deeper into the hive. Jack stumbled, struggling to keep up. "Where the hell are we going?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she stopped abruptly, pressing a clawed hand against a pulsating wall. Jack's breath caught as the wall peeled open, revealing a dark corridor hidden from view. The queen glanced at him. "This will take us to the lower tunnels. The warriors do not know of this path." Jack hesitated. "And then what?" She didn't blink. "Then we take back my throne." The queen's secret. The tunnels were ancient, far older than anything Jack had seen in the hive before. Unlike the upper chambers, which pulsed with green bioluminescence, these walls were blackened, twisted, the air thick with something old. Jack ran a hand along the wall as they moved, frowning. "This place doesn't feel like the rest of your hive." The queen was silent for a long moment. Then she finally said, "Because it is not." Jack turned to her, confused. "What do you mean?" The queen slowed, exhaling deeply. "There was once a time when the Xal Zora were not divided by power and war," she murmured. "Before the wars of conquest, before the throne became a prize to be stolen." Jack frowned. "You're saying your people weren't always like this?" She met his gaze. "Not always." Jack took a slow breath, realization creeping in. "That means you're not just fighting for your throne, are you?" She didn't answer. But Jack saw the truth in her silence. She wasn't fighting to keep power. She was fighting to change the hive itself. A dangerous offer. They finally reached the lower chamber, an underground passageway that opened to the surface of the Xal Zora homeworld. Jack stepped forward, feeling the cool night air for the first time. It was beautiful, a sprawling alien landscape beneath a sky filled with violet moons and streaks of glowing nebulae. Strange, bioluminescent trees stretched toward the sky, their branches swaying in an unseen wind. Jack exhaled, his mind still racing. "We're safe, for now," he said. The queen nodded, but not for long. Jack turned to her, watching the way she stood so still, her gaze fixed on the distant hive. "You're going back, aren't you?" he said. She didn't look at him. "I must." Jack crossed his arms. "Then why bring me here? Why not just leave me to die in the arena?" The queen finally turned, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than ever before. "Because you are different, Jack Carter." Jack's breath caught. The way she said his name, It was the first time she had ever used it. "You do not fight like us," she continued. "You do not think like us. And yet, you survived. You proved yourself to be more than just prey." Jack swallowed hard. "And?" The Queen stepped closer. "And I need you." Jack blinked. "What?" Her mandibles twitched. "You know strategy. You know survival. And unlike my warriors, you do not seek power. You seek something greater." Jack hesitated. "And what exactly are you offering me?" The Queen's voice dropped to a near whisper. "Stand by my side." Silence. Jack felt his chest tighten. "You mean, as an ally?" The Queen's glowing eyes studied him. "As more than that," she murmured. Jack's stomach twisted into knots. This was insane. A week ago, she had wanted to eat him. Now she was asking him to help her take back her throne. To stand by her. To fight beside her. And maybe, to be something even more than that. Jack exhaled sharply, glancing back at the hive. He had a choice to make. And this time, it wasn't just about survival. It was about choosing a side. War and desire. Jack Carter had made his decision. It wasn't about survival anymore. It wasn't about escaping the hive, dodging death, or playing mind games with a terrifying alien queen. This was about war. This was about choosing a side. The queen of the Xal Zora, the towering, deadly ruler who had once planned to devour him whole, now stood before him, not as a monster, but as something else entirely. A leader, a warrior, and a woman fighting for more than just power. Jack exhaled, his muscles still aching from the battle they had barely escaped. The cold night air of the Xal Zora homeworld surrounded them, the twin violet moons casting long shadows over the landscape. The hive was behind them, still burning from the coup that had nearly taken the Queen's life. But this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. The Queen's last stand. Jack turned to her, his gaze steady. "You really think you can take the throne back?" The Queen's mandibles twitched. "I do not think, human. I know." Jack let out a breathy laugh. "Yeah. See, I'd noticed you're not exactly the humble type." She took a step closer. Too close. Jack forced himself to hold her gaze as she studied him. He had seen her fight. He had seen her kill. And yet, for the first time, there was something else in her expression. Something dangerous. Something uncertain. "You have fought beside me," she said. "You have not fled, even when given the chance." Jack shrugged. "Guess I'm just an idiot like that." The Queen's mandibles twitched again. Not quite a smile, but something close. "You are a fool," she murmured, "but a useful one." Jack smirked. "You really know how to sweet-talk a guide, don't you?" She tilted her head, her crimson eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Your kind fascinates me, Jack Carter." Jack's chest tightened. She had never used his full name before. And the way she said it, it wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something else. Something Jack wasn't sure he was ready to face. The battle begins. The ground shook beneath them. Jack turned sharply, his instincts kicking in. In the distance, dark figures moved against the horizon, their shapes barely visible under the moonlight. The Queen's mandibles twitched. "They are coming." Jack didn't need to ask who. Zelvok's forces. The rebels. The traitors. The ones who had tried to kill her. And him. Jack's grip tightened around the alien spear in his hands. "So what's the plan? We just stand here and look pretty, or do we actually fight back?" The Queen let out a soft growl, a sound of approval. "We do more than fight," she said. "We remind them who their queen is." Jack's pulse pounded as the first wave of warriors charged. The night exploded into chaos. The war for the hive. The battlefield became a blur of motion, blood, and violence. The Xal Zora rebels fought with the ferocity of a species bred for war, their exoskeletons shimmering under the moonlight as they lunged forward, claws slashing, mandibles snapping. But the Queen, she was unstoppable. Jack had never seen anything move like her, a whirlwind of death, her claws slicing through enemy warriors like they were made of paper. She didn't just fight to survive. She fought to win. Jack, on the other hand, fought to stay alive. He dodged a spear thrust, twisting at the last second to slam his own stolen weapon into the enemy's side. The warrior screeched, ichor spraying across the ground as it collapsed. Jack barely had time to react before another one lunged at him. But before it could reach him, the queen's tail snapped forward, impaling the attacker through the chest. Jack exhaled sharply as the warrior crumpled. The queen turned to him, her eyes glinting. "Keep up, human." Jack let out a breathless laugh. "Oh yeah, no problem. Just fighting an alien war with no armor and a stick. Totally normal day for me." She didn't answer. But when she turned back to the battlefield, Jack swore he saw the slightest flicker of amusement in her expression. A dangerous temptation. The battle raged for what felt like hours. But in the end, they won. The rebels were scattered, their forces broken. Zelvok was nowhere to be found, having fled when the tide had turned against him. The queen stood at the center of it all, her breath heavy, her claws dripping with blood. Jack wiped his forehead, exhaling sharply. "Well, that was fun." The queen turned to him. "You survived again, human." Jack smirked. "Yeah, guess I'm getting good at it." For a long moment, she just stared at him. Then, before Jack could react, she took a slow step forward. Too close. Again. Jack stiffened as her clawed fingers traced the air near his chest, not quite touching, but close enough that he could feel her warmth. "You are different," she murmured. Jack swallowed hard. "Yeah, you keep saying that." She leaned in slightly, her crimson eyes flickering with something unreadable. "Because it is true," she said softly. Jack's throat went dry. She was too close now, her presence overwhelming. Every survival instinct in his body screamed at him that this was dangerous. But for some reason, he didn't move away. Instead, he met her gaze, his voice quieter now. "So, what happens now?" The queen was silent for a long moment. Then, she tilted her head, studying him like a puzzle she hadn't quite solved yet. "You tell me, human," she murmured. Jack's breath caught. This wasn't just a war anymore. This was something else entirely. Something far more dangerous. And Jack Carter? He had just walked straight into it,